chair of the Council of Christians and Jews. It's so lovely to have a full room, so lovely to be able to do this in person. So thank you again everyone for coming. I want to specifically mention the apologies of people who specifically said they couldn't be here today. So Rabbi Reverend Apple, he lives in Israel, so no surprise he's not here. The Lord Mayor Sally Capp, Bill Clancy, Catherine Papadopoulos, Tilo Troshky, Albert Isaacs, Nicole Cole, Rabbi Jenny Friedman, Dr. Howard Goldberg, Mark Walsh and Alan Samuel. I specifically want to thank you all for being here, making the effort to come here, and for launching this 2022 edition of Gesher. If you haven't got yours yet, you can get them at the end. Go for your life, take them away, give them out, spread them, promote them, and tell all your friends about them. As you know, this edition is called Place and Memory. And we chose this edition because we thought that we'd be able to fill it with nice stories about place, about memory, and as you see, I think we did quite a good job of doing that. And as you also know, place is a really important thing for Indigenous people. There's a few articles in here actually about Indigenous place, the land that we're on all around our country is very important to our First Peoples. And so to acknowledge that, I want to invite Uncle Shane Charles, an Indigenous elder of this land, to give us the official welcome to country. Uncle Shane.
How you doing?
Good.
Thanks for the call. I just have to come along and be a part of this next edition, I guess. But before I pay my respects to my elders from the past, present, and future leaders that are emerging. I guess I was lucky enough and blessed enough to spend a lot of time with a lot of my elders that are gone now, and that reflection and stories that they taught me, that connection to country. The first thing my grandmother taught me was patience. For hours and hours and hours and hours. Sick, I'm teaching you patience, and then she taught me this gift of connection that we had, a spiritual connection to all things like the avatar without the tail. And it's you know, I guess thinking back over the years, I was coming on the train, and I remember these amazing stories of you know, in the earlier days of the colonisation period, where we had a mission that was called Maloga, and then later became Cumbria. But I remember these stories of the Scholar's Hut, and it was the likes of Uncle William Cooper, Uncle Doug Nichols, Auntie Blanche, so many that actually were taught to read and write by news clippings, and that was done by Shadrach James, the teacher that was on Maloga mission at the time, and that sort of started, I guess, that whole unfolding of both, you know, Uncle William and Uncle Doug. I remember more so Uncle Doug coming to pick up my grandmother for church, and they'd go off, and every now and then she'd drag me along to these meetings. I had to sit there and shut up and listen. Very hard for a young boy, but how I was taught that in terms of, you know, this writing for my culture, this whole pedagogy and how we learn, and that is, you know, you can dance that same story, you tell that same story, you paint that story, and you sing that story. So that whole the whole pedagogy and how we learned and how country informed us what was happening and what was going to happen. And you know, it's been a lifelong learning journey, you know, and that's for everybody. We should learn until the day we die about who we are, or create, you know, new knowledge and wisdom. But my grandmother always taught me that you don't keep it, you must pass it on, gift it to somebody who shares it, and so on and so forth. I had a quick look through this edition, very, very good, and I guess that one reflection from Dr. Howard Goldberg, yeah, sort of how he really connected with country, being out on country and learning the stories, and be able to see that through, you know, First People's lens, and how it informs us, but how everything has a place and how everything is respected. So Wamajika, it's in the words of my great-grandfather, Alec McRae, which goes back to Son and Wanga, which goes back again to King Billy, and my grandmother, Violet McRae Briggs, was, you know, very influential in my life. And I remember the words of Uncle Doug, that, you know, we must teach our children our ways, and for them to know their place, but also we must learn the bigger picture in terms of society, so we can take our place and be a part of its present and its future. So, Woman Jika, Ramji Balak Yemen Goodby. Welcome to this evening and congratulations on the new edition.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Uncle Shane. Thank you for that. Those heartfelt words, always coming from the heart. I've heard you speak many times, and I always feel that you really connect to the land. So thank you very much for that. And it also resonates with me from my Jewish connection. You're talking about stories being passed down generation to generation. So that speaks very much to me as well. So thank you very much for that. It's now my great honour to introduce our editor, our outgoing editor for this edition, David Schütz. I want to specifically talk about David before he comes up, to say that David's been very much a powerhouse as editor for the last few years. He took on the role at the start of 2020 when we all thought we were going to have a normal year. And of course, it very much wasn't a normal year. And so together with the committee, the last few years, I think in the last 3 years, we've maybe met a handful of times in person. David has steered our ship and has organised our Zoom meetings and made sure that we all come together and as an editorial committee to do the work of the editorial committee. So I think that's been fantastic. And the other thing I wanted to say is that on top of everything else going on in the world, for personally, David started a PhD earlier this year and could have been well within his rights to say, thanks, but no thanks, I've got other commitments now. But instead, he's stayed on to finish the job he started. So for that, I want to thank you very much, David. And now I want to pass it on to you to say a few words and to introduce our keynote speaker as well.
We didn't have a launch at the end of 2020. We did. It was all. We had 3. What do you call them? Electronic editions, which you can still find on the Gesher website of CCJ. We thought about having them printed in hard copy, but we haven't got to that. So that was the year that, when you look at the collected edition, 2020 won't be there. And when we started doing the 2021, we thought that's the 2021, not the 2021 one. And of course we did the 2022 one too, but we won't. So when we started, we still thought the bushfires were a fairly big thing, which of course they were. We were coming in and we knew we had just experienced a traumatic and deeply difficult time as Australians. And so we'd set out with our minds there, we'd focused on the whole issue of climate and the environment and the damage and the trauma that had been experienced, but soon that was just railroaded by COVID, and we were too, in a way. In my own personal life, I had already been railroaded in a sense, because the work that I'd been doing for 18 years as the Executive Officer of the Ecumenical and Interfaith Commission, Executive Officer for the Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne, well, that had been folded up a matter of mere weeks before then the COVID lockdowns began. So it was a strange time, and I think I will remember these years partly by Gesher. They were my Gesher years. So the pandemic years, the fire years, the years of living off of a payout, the years I was doing my master's degree, but the years I did Gesher. And I am really proud and glad to have been one of the many wonderful people who have edited this. We have one other? Tell me if somebody else here has done the job, but I know Marcia did the job as well. And I remember the days when Moira was always after articles and things for it as well. So if you know to run when you see a Gesher editor. Or actually, you know to run when you see the chair of CCJ heading towards you. He might ask you to be the next editor. That's what might happen next. Place and memory. So Cullen is here today, Cullen Joyce. I did, during my master's degree, I worked with Cullen as a supervisor for a supervised reading unit on this topic of place and memory. And we did, I came to him first, I said, okay, you're into modern philosophy, I want to learn about Heidegger. Not a friend of the show, by the way, we know that. And he said, well, I think the best thing is if you get into this work that that Cullen's own teacher in Tasmania, Jeff Malpas was doing, which was on the philosophy of place. And there was such a lot of material there that when I started delving into it, the depth was, I speak a little bit about this in the editorial, and interestingly, Heidegger had this idea of the way we construct places, and he used the image of a bridge, that by building a bridge over two banks, you then you create a place by joining what wasn't a place together, and people can move across this, the idea of movement. He also used this idea of dwelling, although the idea of dwelling on a bridge is a rather strange thing. But I thought just how wonderful that it all comes back to the Gesher, the bridge, that this organisation is. We have constructed a place in which the dialogue between the Jewish and Christian communities can take place. Gesher is that place, it is that bridge where that happens. Now we can get fairly at home at this. One of the things that I realise, and the reason place and memory goes together, when you're travelling and you're staying in a strange place and you get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, you're liable to kick your foot against something or run into a wall, or you're looking for where the light switch is. You don't have to think about those things at home. You just move through the space that's there. And so place is where our memories are stored. You know, people do that mind castle thing. It's a memory thing where you build a castle in your bed and you put different memories in different rooms. It's because the place and memory connection. And also for those who have suffered, not just had pleasant memories of place, but perhaps had traumatic experiences, they find it traumatic to revisit that place. There's a whole lot of connections. So I'm really thrilled to have here today a lot of the contributors. And my rabbi, Rabbi Fred, I can call you my rabbi, you always have been my rabbi, I've learnt at your feet for many years, has written a great piece here on the Jewish considerations of place and memory, of which is deep there, and we as Christians have borrowed from that and received that as well. As you mentioned also, Howard's piece on the importance of land and place for the Indigenous people here. I want to say so much thanks to Anita. Where's Anita? There you are at the back. Anita did our cover last year. Those of you on the committee, or at least Alex, you know I was messing around with ideas for images of Melbourne when we started. And when Anita just emailed this to me, and when I saw it, I thought, oh my goodness, that's our picture. Because this is our place, this is our shared place, Melbourne, and I was very, very thrilled to get Emeritus Professor of History, Graham Davison, to write, well, he didn't write this specially for it, but it hadn't been published before, so he gave us his essay on celebrating in the city. So that's a celebration of Melbourne itself as well. If I'm flicking through here and just wanting to acknowledge Colleen, thank you for your article. Colleen O'Reilly, I'm going to first. Where are you, Colleen? Over there. Thank you for your article on the Holy Land. Mark Walsh is currently in the Holy Land leading a Bible study tour there, which is why he couldn't be with us today. But we have some wonderful images from Dina Lester of the Schwill National Trail. We've put a great deal of emphasis on photography this time. I want to thank my friend Sean here and my fellow pilgrim for his photo essay of the Camino de Santiago. Sean and I have done our own local pilgrimage all the way to Sydney from St Mary's birthplace here to her tomb in North Sydney. So he is a great and accomplished pilgrim. Thank you, Paul, for your, where's Paul at the back, for your essay on travelling the world through Jewish eyes. I do want to say it's our 125th anniversary of this great building at the moment, hence the focus on St Patrick's, which is a very meaningful place for us as well. Thank you, John, for your piece, and Cullen for yours and your reflections on where you live up in Warburton between Little Joe and the river up there as well. And I especially want to say thank you and acknowledge Colleen Shermer is here today. Colleen's husband, Jeff, provided us with the most wonderful black and white photographs on the front of Gesher, and we've got several pages along with the story of his experience as a hospital chaplain in this edition. And sadly, my first viewing of these photographs was at Jeff's funeral in January. And Jeff was he was very close to me, and I was very close to him for a while because we were both Lutheran pastors together, and I followed after him in my parish there. There are so many memories packed into this book that we have now. Marjorie shares stories of her that she's found of her family in Western Australia who had a brewery going over there as well. Secrets that are in our family. Marcia has shared with us the story of grandfather. In here, the story of and memories from there, and photographs of the experiences of what was a very traumatic time, and acknowledging Lee as well. Thank you, Lee, for your piece of art, because some memories are very traumatic and we do not forget them. And we say never forget. That means always remember. I could keep on going through this. This is, as I was reading the proofs of it, I found myself not checking for errors, but again, rereading all of the stories there. They will last for years to come. It's my pleasure now also to introduce Bob Derrenbacker, who is the associate professor of New Testament studies here. One of the themes we were originally tossing about was not just place and memory, but place and memory and text. We eventually dropped the text because it was too complicated to bring in another theme. But written words are the other side, which I was working with Cullen with as well, when it comes to memories, that we like to try and lock them down into words. So, Bob, I would like to ask you to address us with our keynote address today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. It's a real pleasure and a true honor for me to be asked to launch this volume of Gesher on place and memory. I'd like to begin by just saying that Trinity College stands on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. These were lands that were taken and not ceded. These lands have been cared for by their elders since their creation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and recommit myself to the ongoing work of reconciliation. Trinity College, where you are today, this place where you find yourselves this afternoon, is a college that was opened in 1872, so we're celebrating our 150th anniversary this year. It's a college that's comprised of 3 divisions: a residential college for the University of Melbourne, a pathway school which provides a pathway into the University of Melbourne for international students, and then the Theological School, where I serve as Dean. In addition to serving as Dean, as David mentioned, I am also the Frank Woods Associate Professor in New Testament. And among other things, I have academic expertise in the Gospels and the letters of Paul. And there are at least 2 reasons why I think it's serendipitous. Some of us might use a different word there, providential perhaps, that I have been asked to launch this significant volume on place and memory. First, my own academic writing has most recently taken me back into the account of the transfiguration of Jesus in the Synoptic Gospels, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You might know that story. It's a rather strange story that appears in the middle of the Synoptic Gospels, where Jesus hikes up a mountain in Galilee, possibly Mount Tabor, with 3 of his disciples. There he is transformed in his appearance, and then Elijah and Moses suddenly appear. The disciple Peter's response to these strange events is very interesting. He says to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here." Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While Peter's suggestion to build 3 dwellings is perhaps an echo to the festival of the booths, or Sukkot, it is interesting how both place and memory feature in this story. Invoking place, Peter states that it is good for us to be here. And invoking memory, perhaps, Peter suggests that 3 shrines be constructed. So it's that article that I'm working on right now on the Transfiguration where I thought, oh, this is very interesting how there's an intersection here. It's also perhaps serendipitous for me to launch this volume of Gesher as I have been living vicariously some through my wife's, Cindy's, academic work in theology over the past couple of years. Last year, she successfully completed a minor thesis on a Christian theology of place, which has, in addition to reading the several drafts of her thesis, exposed me to some of the scholarship in this field. Could be argued that the most influential work on Christian theology of place is John Inge, I-N-G-E, currently Church of England Bishop of Worcester and theologian in his own right, and I'll be making reference to his book in just a few moments. All this to say is that while I'm not at all an expert in the theologies of place and memory, I have been bumping into these discussions over the past couple of years. I've also had aspirations and some experience with interfaith discussions and dialogue, having some involvement with Jewish-Christian dialogue as a doctoral student in Toronto many years ago, as well as some more recent opportunities for dialogue with my Muslim friends within the Australian Intercultural Society. And my own guild of New Testament studies is kind of going through a change at the moment. There was a time where New Testament scholars would describe Jesus or even Paul against Judaism. And then that preposition changed to alongside of Judaism. And now it's shifted to within Judaism. So it's a very interesting shift that's happening in my own guild of New Testament studies, whether it's the study of Paul or the study of Jesus in the Gospels, to now locate these Christian texts within Judaism of the first century. Very interesting. So I look forward to our dialogue and our discussion later today, this afternoon, and I'm very honored again to receive this invitation to launch this volume of Gesher, hoping that it is the beginning of some more opportunities for interfaith discussion and dialogue in the months and years to come. So let me just turn to the issue itself. This is a wonderfully diverse collection of essays, artwork, and photography that communicate beautifully Christian and Jewish understandings of place and memory. It is eclectic in the best sense of the word, eclectic. Because I know so much work has gone into this volume, I just want to say a couple of words about each of the essays. David's already talked about some of them, but if you're here, just wave your hand, not so much for the rest of the crowd, but just for me, so I can put a face to a name in this place. So Fred Morgan. Fred Morgan's essay describes how memory and place are central to the dynamic of Judaism. Graham Davison reminds us of the importance of ceremony and celebration in the life of the city. Catherine Papadopoulos relates how at the core of St. Basil the Great's theology, one of the Cappadocian fathers, at the core of his theology was the conception of the religious life as a pathway, a movement between God and humanity. Howard Goldenberg describes how the experience of his Jewish ancestors, immigrants to Australia in the late 19th century, informs his understanding of his sense of home and place, especially through the lens of First Peoples. Raymond Apple remembers how Rabbi Danglau shaped and influenced his beloved family shul in St. Kilda. Howard Nathan tells the story of the intrusion of Christian graves into the Jewish section of the White Hill Cemetery in Bendigo, with a resulting apology and excision of these graves from this section. David Schütz gives a detailed and inspiring tour of the Roman Catholic Cathedral St. Patrick here in Melbourne. John DePouche describes his interfaith. I was talking to John, there he is. His interfaith, what he calls an ashram in Warburton, a community of 6 from various religious traditions who together have a keen multi-faith sense of place. Colin Joyce relates how this same community, in instilling a profound sense of place and belonging, has been essential in his own healing. Along with some of his beautiful black and white photographs, the late Jeff Shermer relates the story of his encounter with Veronica as a Lutheran hospital chaplain. Marjorie Solomon tells how a Jewish couple built an influential and vibrant community in the town of Northam in WA in the 19th century. Adam Gia makes a strong case for Christians joining the March of the Living, a 3-kilometer walk between Auschwitz and Birkenau, to mark both the Shoah and the founding of the modern state of Israel. Maria Pinskier tells the story of her Hungarian grandparents who were lost in the Holocaust, and how the tombstone, Matseva, of her paternal grandfather has allowed her to, and I quote her here, find place to stand, mourn, find solace, and give due honor and remembrance, so that all may be remembered and honored. I look forward to hearing more from Marcia in a few minutes. Jenny Friedman describes how participants in work of the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture had developed a common sense of Jewish life and Jewish peoplehood, despite being scattered throughout the world. And then Mike Zervos tells the story of Courage to Care Victoria, an initiative of B'nai B'rith that works to transform people from being bystanders to people who are upstanders. I love that contrast there. Ones who speak out against racism and discrimination and work for acceptance and diversity. There are, of course, also beautiful examples of art and photo essays in this volume by Anita Roloff, Sean Deeney, and Lee Hirsch, all of which make this volume not just intellectually stimulating, but also visually appealing and visually stimulating as well. I appreciated too how the art and essays were concluded with Robert Alter's wonderful translation of and commentary on Psalm 137, that beautifully honest psalm that describes the emotions and experiences of the people of God living in displaced exile in Babylon, and how the act of corporate lament becomes an act of corporate memorialization of homeland and place. What an appropriate way to conclude the volume. Now, those of you with a keen sense of the contents of the volume will know I've yet to mention 4 other essays, those by Colleen O'Reilly, Dina Lester, Mark Walsh, and Paul Forgas. These are essays that all deal generally with the theme of religious and cultural pilgrimage. And I thought I would offer some penultimate remarks around these essays and their unifying theme of pilgrimage, and how pilgrimage contributes to theologies of memory and place. And I'd like to begin by reading a brief passage from this book by John Ing, A Christian Theology of Place. So remember, he is writing as a Christian here, but he's devoted a whole chapter to pilgrimage. Plus, in that chapter, he has a section on memory and on the way that shrines on pilgrimage help with memory. So this is what he says. He says, pilgrimage is a journey to places where divine human encounter has taken place. It is a journey to places where holiness has been apparent in the lives of Christian men and women who have been inspired by such an encounter and have responded to it wholeheartedly in their lives. It is travel to the dwelling places of the saints. As such, pilgrimage is firstly about roots. It reminds the traveler of the Christian heritage of which he or she is part. The pilgrimage shrine speaks in many different ways of that heritage. Secondly, pilgrimage is about journey. It reminds those traveling that their lives are a journey to God. The pilgrimage is symbolic of that larger journey. This aspect of journey is pregnant with biblical resonances, beginning with Abraham leaving his homeland to travel to the promised land, and ending with the Christians traveling to their heavenly homeland, the New Jerusalem. These biblical images reveal the third ingredient of pilgrimage, an eschatological one, which is about destination and the consummation of all things in Christ. So in light of Ing's comments, I think a few observations are worth noting here that perhaps draw this series of these 4 essays on pilgrimage together. First, there are often different reasons for going on pilgrimage, and these reasons are not always religious. I know when I lead a group to the Holy Land, and Colleen can attest to this because Colleen was on my last pilgrimage to the Holy Land, as was Ben Thomas sitting to Colleen's right. We start our pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the ancient port city of Caesarea Maritima, the place where Christian pilgrims landed centuries ago. There I introduce our pilgrimage and recognize that not all in our group of pilgrims are religious pilgrims or even people of faith. Some are there as sort of historical or intellectual pilgrims, wanting to learn more, with the journey itself being the means of this pedagogy. I think we see this motif in all 4 essays on pilgrimage, but especially in Dana Lester's and Paul Forgaz's contributions. I was particularly struck by Paul Forgaz's description of the discovery of absence in his essay on his Jewish travel experiences through Europe, where one often finds, and I quote him here, not a single remnant of what were once vibrant localities of Jewish life. He calls this the presence of the absence, and invisible sites, as he calls it. I think the second thing, it's worth also noting the sense of the potential absence of authenticity that both Colleen O'Reilly's and Mark Walsh's essays drive home. Absence of authenticity on a pilgrimage. Colleen makes the point that often on Holy Land pilgrimages, discovering the actual spots or the exact spots on Holy Land pilgrimages is to perhaps miss the point of the pilgrimage. For a good religious pilgrimage is not just about learning about the past, but also learning about the present and the potential better future. Mark Walsh makes a similar point. We may never know for sure if the El Camino de Santiago on the Iberian Peninsula really does trace the actual footsteps of James. But perhaps what is more important is the story of the development of the pilgrimage route and how it has shaped the land and the people of Spain and Portugal, which Mark does so ably in his essay. So what Colleen and Mark so importantly affirm is the point that I think John Ing makes in his book. Pilgrimage is about journey. It reminds those traveling that their lives are a journey to God. The pilgrimage is symbolic of that larger journey. There is more that I could say about this important volume of Gesher, in which I have spent the last 5 days immersed. But let me draw to a close by quoting from David Schütz's editorial, which both summarizes the themes of this volume and their importance to both Jews and Christians, as well as their dialogue together. And David alluded to this in his remarks. And I quote him here, page 4. Like its parent organization, the Council of Christians and Jews Victoria, Gesher is a place of gathering and of pilgrimage. It is a constructed place, but not an artificial place, where our two communities and traditions are able to cross those liminal boundaries and encounter one another with integrity and openness, even if sometimes there are unavoidable clashes. Perhaps, if anything, we do not need to be cautious that we do not make the council and this journal a static place of dwelling, but keep always in our minds that a bridge is a place of movement, a place that enables the pilgrim way to continue despite formidable barriers, and people on opposite sides to cross into each other's territory. So, Gesher, Volume 8, a volume dedicated to place and memory, is a wonderfully diverse collection of essays, artwork, and photographs, all dedicated to the important and related topics of memory and place. Topics that are becoming more and more relevant in a time where memory and place are less and less significant for a world that is more globalized and more virtual than it ever has been. I will be commending this important work to the staff and students of Trinity College Theological School and to any who are doing theological research in the important fields of memory and place. So thank you and congratulations to all the contributors to this volume and to the volume's editor, David Schütz. And to paraphrase St. Peter on Mount Tabor, it is good for us to be here. Thus, it gives me great pleasure to declare this 8th volume of Gesher on place and memory officially launched.
That you said just then, Bob, reminded me, I think Bernard Koopman might have been the one who told me this. He said to me, Jews don't have roots, they have legs. Now, that has a negative side to it. There's a reality there. Roots and legs. And it was, Bernard was one of those wonderfully interesting people that I had the great pleasure to meet when I was he was doing a radio program that I don't know if he still does it.
J-Air.
Yes, J-Air, and for J-Air, and it was great to be on it. Another person who I had great pleasure meeting back in my days when I was Executive Officer of the Ecumenical and Interfaith Commission of the Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne was the Commissioner of the Victorian Multicultural Commission. And Marcia held that job for a very long time. And as I said before, there's this, and has been mentioned a couple of times, there is this article of Marcia's on her experience, her family's experience, on her grandfather's life and experiences. Right at the end, now it's not at the end because it's the least important, it's because we had to squeeze it in at the last minute, but I'm very glad we did. It was a hold the press moment, and I'm so glad that this has brought in this extra dimension here as well. It's my pleasure actually to invite now Marcia, who is present with us today, to say a few words to us as well.
I have to start by apologising for inconveniencing everybody for the hold the press moment. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this unceded land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, their elders past, present, and the potential of those emerging. I'd like to recognise their care and stewardship of our precious lands, the flora and fauna, the seas and waters over the millennia past. Likewise, I acknowledge the elders and those who have contributed to the faith and cultures of all gathered here today, and all whose histories continue to bring wealth to our daily lives. It's been a privilege to have been asked to speak at the launch today of Place and Memory, Gesher 2022. As a theme, I'd like to speak today to the concept of spectrums. Gesher, you can see this is, I'm going to roll over something that's been a concept for me. Gesher is a bridge. What is a bridge if not a spectrum, a continuum? Indeed, for many of us who have enjoyed the riches of Gesher over many years, we've been able to see the wealth of narrative and artistic content, a continuum of contributions that annually enrich the lives of those picking up a copy and enjoying the diversity it continues to offer. There are a number of spectrums, a number of continuums I'd like to reflect on with you today. Firstly, the continuum, the privileged continuum of my own personal involvement with the Council of Christians and Jews Victoria. This began, and as is not uncommon, with a tap on the shoulder by an individual who shines in our community, someone who sits aloft and is a role model for us all, the wonderful Risha Rosen. And I'm looking, where are you, Risha? Risha. Always the wonderful Risha. Risha encouraged me to become involved with the development of Gesher, and under the editorial leadership of the very exceptional Walter Rappaport, another star in our interfaith and community harmony spectrum, I joined the editorial committees of Gesher 2014, Social Justice, and Gesher 2015, Anniversaries. There is no doubt that life offers an ongoing spectrum or continuum of opportunities, and a number of years later I was generously offered the opportunity to return to the committee and undertake the role of lead editor for production of Gesher 2018, Politics and Religion, and Gesher 2019, Women in Religion. The production of these issues was a great joy and a real gift in my life. I would note that the Council of the CCJ on these occasions were very liberal in allowing me the option to select the themes of these annual journals, hand in hand with their agreement. Though they perhaps had some other thoughts as to what might be the way to go, when I softly put my foot down, they were very, very kind about letting me go with my preference. So I suppose a word to you, David. I can say congratulations. I think the theme you went with was a star also, and I think clearly there's much to be said for encouraging the editor to recognise what the editor brings to the story. Looking back on these issues, the ones that I was privileged to lead, as perhaps I may not have seen at the time, I considered that the sense of tangible and intangible that spoke to me so strongly in my thematic choice at those times was very resonant, as indeed I've seen in this issue. And so again, it really resonated with your own choice, David. I can see that being an editor, perhaps there's a real commonality when one steps up to be an editor, and by the end of the exhausted task, one goes off and perhaps does something not so wise. I also went off and did a PhD, which is what I'm doing now, so something to think on. Anyway, so my role then, to be an editor, and again, as I've said, a gift and a joy. This year, the very gifted writer and publisher Marjorie Solomon approached me and invited me to write for the journal, to take a new position along my spectrum of Gesher involvement. Marjorie indicated the theme of the journal was place and memory, and it reached out to me within moments. As a spectrum, an opportunity to speak of both the tangible and the intangible. Place, something solid, something of presence and being. Memory, something ethereal, an opportunity to envision, something that governs fact in both the past but also in the future. I remember even as I stood chatting with Marjorie in her front hall, my mind turned immediately to my own memories, based in place, but that governed memories and the words that would come. Having had the opportunity likewise to look through Gesher, I've been immediately struck by the weight of so many contributions which, like mine, reflect on memory as a journey to the present, to the current, the commonality of a former place as a rich source of encounter with past lives, as pathway to the present, often carrying possibilities and gifts of benefits endowed. I'd like to take, I think the essays have been very thoroughly and richly acknowledged and addressed, but I would like to take a moment to address even the in memoriam pages. I think they're well worth taking a moment, and I'm going to just address them in brief, if I may, and celebrate the individuals who have enriched us all in both memory and place, and indeed a spectrum of the ethereal and the tangible. Firstly, Dr. Helen Light AM, renowned in the Jewish community for both her tangible and conceptual areas of leadership, including the Jewish Museum of Australia and her many interfaith roles, including involvement with the Council of Christians and Jews, the Jewish Christian Muslim Association and the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria, to name just a few. No less a star in our memorial firmament, and well known to us all, Professor Emeritus the Reverend Gary D. Boma, AM. Renowned as a brilliant academic, his leadership as chairperson of the organising committee of the 2009 Parliament of World Religions in Melbourne brought a tangible presence and strength to our interfaith community and vision in its international visibility. We recognise him for so much more. His appointment as the UNESCO Chair in Interreligious and Intercultural Relations, Asia Pacific at Monash, and numerous awards received in recognition of his constant contributions to interfaith and intercultural harmony. This is just an abbreviation of what we have sitting within the journal, and I really encourage you all to read the detail within these columns. The memories of Dr. Light and Reverend Boma are a gift to us all. To a few words on my own narrative. Place and time, grief and solace in Tonya Spalzer, Hungary. I'm going to do a very little abbreviation reading and talk about my experience. So, a grave is a place to both mourn and find solace. We place a stone to mark our visit, our presence, our ongoing remembrance of an individual lost. My father, Joseph Eisenberger, came to Australia alone as a refugee following the Holocaust in 1950. He has recently passed away. He was born in the small peasant village of Tonya Spalzer in Hungary, where a community of Jews had survived since 1757. In May 1939, the Hungarian government distinguished Jews as a racial rather than religious group and established the Hungarian labour service system, which Jewish men of military age were forced to join. My father's father, Yeno, was one of these forced to join, and he was drafted along with many fellow Jews. Many would die in this system. Yeno and others in his unit were directed to sleep in a barn. Yeno had severe asthma and chose to sleep outside, despite the freezing temperatures. The result was my father's father, Yeno, developed a severe case of pneumonia and was sent home, where he died. I can only imagine the tremendous grief of my father's family as they mourned his death. The sorrow of his wife, children and parents, the distress of his cousins, friends and colleagues. This untimely and unjust death must have seemed without reason or purpose. Between mid-May and early July 1944, 430,000 Hungarian Jews, predominantly in rural and regional locations, were deported to the death camps. Just over 50 Jews still lived in Tonya Spalzer, almost every one of whom was deported to Auschwitz. My father lost his mother, grandparents and brother. Yeno was left behind in the small Jewish cemetery where he had been buried years later. Yeno's tombstone, visible and upright to this day, the last erected, marks the last Jewish death prior to the eradication of the rest of this Jewish community. I have been privileged to visit it on a number of occasions. Somehow, during all my visits to Tonya Spalzer, and even indeed from across the world, I cannot but constantly consider the incredible blessing that this same death has bequeathed me. The word mitzvah references a sacred pillar or monument. It stands to honour an individual lost. Yeno's premature passing has enabled me to visit this tiny Jewish cemetery and stand by this sacred pillar, this monument to my grandfather, and honour him as I never thought would be possible. Indeed, this monument to Yeno's life has become a personal monument for all my father's family, and indeed this entire Jewish community, otherwise lost in the abyss. So indeed the anomaly of both a tragedy and a blessing, for who would conceive in this place where an individual and community have been murdered, that Yeno's tragic death in its time has meant that in a future far away, so too all may be remembered and honoured, as I have a place to stand, mourn, find solace, and give honour and remembrance due. I'd like to take this moment, as I close, to note that I have in my heart a sense that the Council of Christians and Jews is a place of honour. It's a place of remembrance, and it is a place of dialogue. So I would really like to honour this organisation and all who participate in the outstanding work that it does. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you to our two speakers who very clearly researched a lot of what they said, read the editions thoroughly, and gave us insight that I don't think we otherwise would have had. So thank you so much to both of you. Thank you, Marsha, specifically for also mentioning the in memoriam pages. I was going to mention that, so thank you for mentioning those. And for enlightening us and giving us insight into your piece as well. So thank you. It's now my pleasure, my honour, to introduce Samantha Lo, our guest musician, to play some pieces for us on her harp. If we can turn our attention to Samantha, she's a candidate for ordination as well as a professional musician. So let's hear what she plays for us. Thank you.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. This piece is written by a contemporary harpist, Rhett Barnwell, and it's called Calls of the Innocents, and it's one that I particularly love. It's a piece written for his two little granddaughters, and it's like a conversation between the two children, and you'll be able to hear that with the different voices in each hand.
I don't know about all of you, but I don't hear the harp very often, so that was really a treat for me, so thank you. Thank you for that. It's now, to finish off, it's my honour to call Colleen O'Reilly, or should I say the Venerable Dr. Colleen O'Reilly AM, to present the official vote of thanks. Colleen, as we've heard, is a contributor to this edition, but she's also a member of the editorial committee and also on our CCJ executive, so very much involved and busy with our organisation. And it's because of Colleen, thanks to her relationship with Bob, that we're in this building and using this room today as well. So Colleen, over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, it's my delightful pleasure to thank you all for coming. Bridge builders, one and all, thank you for being here. And there are some people to thank. Uncle Shane, thank you for welcoming us and reminding us that the God of creation was known in this place long before Abraham took that first step or Jesus went mountain climbing with his mates. Good to be reminded, thank you. Sam, thank you for your beautiful music. Thank you to all those who spoke today, but let me say thank you to Bob for such a splendid, scholarly, thoughtful reflection about Gesher. Thank you very much. I do hope it'll be on our website. David Schütz. David, thank you. It's been wonderful working with you the last 3 years, and I'm sorry that you're no longer going to be our editor. Fully understand the reasons, but you've been splendid to work with, and we've had a great time working on Gesher with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
And to all who contributed or who've spoken today, to Marcia, thank you. And again, to all of you coming today to build bridges between our communities so that we understand one another better, love one another more, and the world is a better place.